one of the biggest names in British show business, knighted by both the Queen and the Pope, a figure so beloved he was considered a mix of saint and national treasure, the man who ran marathons for charity, raising so much money that a hospital handed him his own set of keys. But underneath this glowing public image, there was a predator, a sexual predator, who operated with impunity for decades. Behind the mask of a harmless showbiz figure was a man who spent 50 years abusing children with hundreds of victims. It was evil, pure and simple. Now for the first time we reveal clues that were right there 29 years ago yet were ignored.
It's a no-go area and I don't grasp on nobody.
And this is when Savile's mask finally began to slip.
No, women know too much. I'm all for girls that don't know too much.
His words, his actions, now dissected by experts in body language, linguistics and forensic psychology. Then Savile pulls out the banana again. Why? Because it's a distraction. It diverts attention from the core of the question, a clever tactic to shift the focus. But it also reveals more than he intended. Here we see a man, unknowingly telling us things we should have noticed long ago. Jimmy Savile didn't just groom individuals, he groomed an entire nation. I tell lies when it's all spent. For 5 decades, Jimmy Savile was one of the brightest stars in Britain. It's hard to comprehend now just how huge he was. He was everywhere, the biggest figure on British television, a mix of saint and national treasure, unmistakable, flamboyant, and the face of the BBC's iconic Top of the Pops. Jimmy Savile, welcome to Unveiled Crime Mysteries channel, where I unveil mysterious true crimes, some lost to time, others fresh in memory. Justice might not be served, but the shadow is unveiled. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome indeed to Top of the Pops, he declared on New Year's Day 1964. He knew how to get noticed, so he played the game, changing his hair every week, a new color, always fresh. He earned his own primetime show. In an interview, he recalled how it all started.
I was walking down the corridor at Television Centre and the legendary Bill Cotton, and he said, "You've been fixing things for people all your life. Let's put some pictures to it and we'll make a show." And I said, "Okay, we'll call it Jim will fix it."
He became the man who could grant children's wishes, the larger-than-life figure who everyone treated like royalty.
When the government and the BBC needed someone to front a campaign for road safety, it was called Clunk Click Every Trip, they got Savile to do it.
It's very likely that 400 of you will be injured in your cars tomorrow.
Because he was the most trusted and admired and respected person in Britain.
Clunk the car door, click the seatbelt, even if you are just going round the corner, clunk click every trip.
For loads of kids, you hear people say Jimmy Savile was part of my childhood. He was certainly part of mine. I used to love watching Jim Will Fix It.
I wrote to him because I wanted to meet Kermit the Frog, and I believed that he was the man that could make it happen. It's amazing. How were we not all terrified as children by this man who is creepy looking, quite frankly?
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to some more super Jim will fix it.
But away from the TV studio, Savile was the ultimate do-gooder, raising millions for charity. But how does someone raise £10 million in 3 years?
He had real power and real influence. His friends, and we're talking proper friends, included Mrs. Thatcher. He used to spend Christmas with the Thatchers at Chequers. The Pope, he got an honorary papal knighthood. He was good friends with her and him, as he called them, Charles and Di. He was even called in to try and mediate in their divorce. Prince Charles wrote him a letter. "I'm often asked how to describe you. Are you my unofficial health advisor, a trusted confidant, or indeed simply a friend? The answer, of course, to Jimmy, is all of these and more. No one will ever know the full extent of what you have done for this country, and no one's more grateful than I. With affectionate greeting, Charles, the Prince of Wales."
But behind this charming facade lay the full extent of Jimmy Savile's deception. It's clear Savile didn't have a genuine passion for charity work. He picked and chose only the high-profile events. He wasn't doing it for the cause, he was doing it for himself. The sad irony is that these charitable efforts were simply a cover for his darker actions. These public displays gave him unparalleled access to vulnerable children, both girls and boys. The statistics surrounding Savile's offences are staggering. The term prolific doesn't even come close. The earliest recorded accusation dates back to 1955 and the most recent to 2009. He was active for decades, and remember, these are only the offences that were reported. One of the first to come forward was Cat Ward. At 14, she attended a school for emotionally disturbed girls.
I was quite horrified when I reached the gates of Duncroft, which said, "Duncroft, Home Office approved school for intelligent but emotionally disturbed girls."
The headmistress, believing entertainment would benefit the girls, invited Jimmy Savile.
He'd bring boxes of the latest top 10 records and cigarettes, makeup, perfume, all the things that teenage girls would like. And he'd take us for a ride in his swanky Rolls-Royce car. And then the one he wanted to spend some time with would be invited to come and sit with their ice cream in the front. And that's when he'd get an attack of wandering hands or worse.
They recorded 214 crimes against Savile, and these included over 124 indecent assaults and up to 32 rape or penetration offences. And I think you can comfortably multiply that by a factor of 10, because many people we know will not come forward. So you've got a picture of a predator, a sexual predator who operated at will over decades.
And yet Savile managed to get away with it, even when he dropped the most obvious clues.
I'm odd. You're different. That's not a bad double. Between us, we should be able to do something.
Question notice, the or not is omitted.
How do they know whether I am or not? How does anybody know whether I am? Nobody knows whether I am or not.
The focus is more on being a paedophile than it is not being a paedophile.
How does anybody know whether I am?
Fortune definitely favours the brave, and when you are brazen enough to actually mention the unmentionable yourself, then you take control of that narrative and you're in charge of that situation.
The idea of using a metaphor to do with hunt is interesting because it not only points to witch hunt, but it sets up this idea of a predator.
That puts a lot of salacious tabloid people off the hunt.
So the idea that he's the person who's putting other people off the hunt is that he's actually engaged in some activities that he needs to keep from the salacious tabloid people.
So he implies that there's a reason why they would want to tarnish his reputation. So he's making us feel sympathetic towards him, and he's just misleading us because he knows that in actual fact there's real grounds for these tabloid rumours.
6 months earlier, in 1999, on Have I Got News for You, Savile outwitted even the sharpest minds, leaving them speechless. "You used to be a wrestler, didn't you?" one of the hosts asked. "I still am," Savile replied. "Are you?" The host pressed. "I'm feared in every girls' school in this country. This was risky. This was dangerous. Have I Got News for You was a tough show. It didn't back down." But Savile went straight in with, "I'm feared in every girls' school in the country. This is what we call telling the truth falsely. If you exaggerate something enough, it can disguise the lie. He's hiding in plain sight." The audience laughs, thinking it's just part of the act, but in reality, Savile is revealing truths, ones that many girls, his victims, had been afraid to speak out about. It's a double bluff. We think it's funny. We think he's just poking fun at himself, that he's harmless, maybe a bit unlucky or not particularly interested in sexual matters. But that's not the case. He's the only one who knows that. In hindsight, what he said isn't funny at all. "I'm feared in every girls' school in this country." Savile hid behind the mask of the quirky DJ, the eccentric British personality. People knew he was a bit odd, but they expected it from him. It was part of his charm. They assumed underneath it all, he was harmless. But that mask wasn't just for entertainment. It was a way to control people. Away from the public eye, there were dark whispers about his private life. In a lesser-known 1995 interview, a serious journalist tried to dig beneath the surface. "Good evening and welcome, Sir James Savile OBE, the man who has single-handedly raised more than £30 million for charity," the host introduced him. The Faking It team examined this interview, pushing Savile further than he'd ever been tested. He entered the room confident, expecting tough questions. He knew he'd have to deal with them, but he also knew he had the smoke and mirrors ready. The experts saw it, though. Underneath that facade, you could see the signs of anxiety. His body language betrayed him. Savile had perfected the persona of an outrageous character, someone who could say anything, manipulate language, and control the conversation. He knew exactly how to use tactics to get the upper hand. Andrew Neil, the respected interviewer, pressed him about his supposed Playboy DJ lifestyle. "Have you had lots of female?" "I would hope so," Savile responded. "Because being alive a long time, I would have hoped that one would have had lots and lots of them." But when pressed further, Savile had a prop ready. A banana. Why bring a banana? Because he knew he'd be asked difficult questions, and having a prop to distract, something silly like a banana, would shift the audience's focus and get them on his side again. It made the interviewer look silly for asking serious questions. People don't walk into interviews and start eating, let alone pull out a banana, a phallic symbol no less. But Savile knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just answering questions, he was taking control. When Andrew Neil pressed Savile with difficult questions after he peeled the banana, it was already too late. The moment had passed. Savile casually remarked,
All my mother ever told me was not to eat while I was talking, but that was another issue. He added, bananas weren't around in those days. It's the 90s, a time when comedy wasn't as sharp as it is now. Back then, all the audience needed from Savile were a few laughs, a bit of his trademark now then, and maybe a comedy banana. What was he really doing? Putting something in his mouth to avoid having to answer directly. It was all part of the show, and that answer, it's all part of the act too. He knew exactly how to avoid questions without even trying. I am very boring, thank God, he said. Throughout the interview, there was a constant battle between Andrew Neil trying to get to the truth and Savile skillfully resisting exposure, but sometimes Savile slipped up. No, women know too much. I'm all for girls that don't know too much. It's different class, you see. He made a clear distinction between women and girls. And if you pick up on this, it's a sign that Savile preferred young girls, ones who weren't quite women yet, the ones who could be easily manipulated. No, women know too much. I'm all for girls that don't know too much. Different class, you see. Let's break it down. Girls here likely refers to young girls, and that could take us into dangerous territory, underage girls even. It's a Freudian slip, one that Savile doesn't seem to recognize. The clues were there, plain for everyone to see, but we let them slide. We laughed it off because we thought he was just poking fun at himself. He was just the weird, harmless DJ, right? But in hindsight, it wasn't funny. I've gone through life being a sex symbol, but that wasn't the real joke. As Savile tried to make light of his secrets, his lifelong friend Charles Halligan dropped a potentially damning hint. Savile quickly tried to brush it off, but his self-correction was telling. Why did he feel the need to clarify that young ones meant 16 and over? Another friend of Savile's even named a woman he'd been with, and described the hotel where they met. Being a DJ didn't just bring you fame, it brought you girls. Lots of girls. Did it? Asked the interviewer. Well, I think it did, Savile answered. His friend knew something that wasn't said. They talked about a small hotel near Tottenham Court Road, where Savile would meet girls. One in particular Jim might remember, called Norma. Savile's quick thinking kicked in. You could see it in his face, rapid blinking, a sure sign of cognitive load. He was working out how to handle it. Then he turned the tables with a counterattack. Well, Sir Jim, I think I'd like to ask you about Norma. Savile wasn't rattled. I don't mind getting Bonnie off the hook, 'cause he's married. Now then, his girlfriend is called Norma, and he's fixed it for me. He was sending a message loud and clear. You mess with me and I'll mess with you. The audience thought it was a joke, but for the friend it wasn't funny. Savile used his own catchphrase, playing with words and shifting blame. Norma, a lovely girl, he said before making it clear that he didn't even remember her name. I'm the friend who's down here, don't you want? It was as if he was erasing her, as if she didn't matter, and by doing so he could control how people saw her. Maybe she was a victim, and Savile was deliberately disregarding her. He made a joke out of it, but the audience didn't see the darkness beneath it. He wasn't joking when he said it was me. It was me who was beastly with, what do you call her again, Norma? Norma. He couldn't even recall her name after using it several times. This was a slip-up, an admission. During the interview, the truth was always just beneath the surface, and Savile couldn't help but reveal it. When asked why he shied away from close relationships with women, Savile replied, "Stop it. We'll have a few close relationships tonight, if anybody's not spoken for." This wasn't a joke. He was brazen, even in front of a camera. No one would expect anyone to be that bold on live TV. But Savile made his move. I'm very weak. I can resist everything but temptation. He didn't say much of substance, though. It was all superficial charm, just enough to keep the audience laughing and distracted from the real questions. This was the Jimmy Savile show. Tracksuit, jewelry and patter, but nothing deep. It was all part of his facade, and people believed it. Savile's past was just as revealing. He came from a deprived background in Leeds, the youngest of 7 children. His mother, whom he called the Duchess, was his whole world. They were close, but emotionally distant. As a young man, Savile was driven to make himself bigger, more powerful, more impressive than anyone else. He dabbled in scrap metal, wrestling, and then saw an opportunity in rock and roll. But it was in dance halls where he started developing a darker side. In his autobiography, he even bragged about chaining people to chairs in his basement. He never married, and lived with his mother until her death. Was it his bond with her that stopped him from forming relationships with other women? Unfortunately, no, he said. Unfortunately. When asked if his mother was the only woman he had a close relationship with, Savile took a long time to answer. He lit a cigar to buy himself some time. In 10 seconds he had created 2 paragraphs of narrative to deflect. His mother didn't want anyone to threaten her life of luxury, and she'd throw any woman out who came close. Out. Get out. Little vixen, he said of her. Savile's real interests lay elsewhere. He didn't care about a stable relationship. He wanted vulnerable, young girls. Once he figured out the type of girls at Duncroft approved school, he was like a kid in a candy store. In 1973, he was invited to entertain girls there. These were emotionally damaged girls, and he went through them one by one. One of the girls, Kat Ward, was just 14 when she was sexually abused by him. She was promised a chance to be on TV in exchange for her compliance. At the time, she didn't see it as abuse. It seemed like a fair trade to her, given her mindset as a vulnerable, damaged individual. Kat was taken to the BBC television centre and shown off to celebrities, but Savile's real intentions were clear. He would ask her to sit on his knee, and she would feel his male parts pressing against her as he juggled his leg. Savile ordered her to keep quiet. "We don't grass," he told her. "A gentleman never tells what's passed between himself and a lady." That same language resurfaced years later. "I don't grass on nobody," Savile repeated in an interview. "There are certain things that are no-go areas," he added, reinforcing the idea that he had secrets, and nobody could get to them. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was controlling the people around him. He expected them to act the way he wanted. Savile made it clear that he wouldn't speak about certain things, and everyone around him was expected to comply. He wasn't just a manipulative man, he was a master at hiding in plain sight. He used his charity work to gain access to vulnerable victims, all while building a reputation as a generous philanthropist. But behind closed doors, his manipulation and abuse continued unchecked. The Jimmy Savile scandal teaches a harsh lesson about how unscrupulous people can use the law to protect themselves, even as they commit terrible acts. Savile managed to avoid any real charges or public exposure for decades. His ruthlessness and dishonesty allowed him to escape, time and time again. "I tell lies when it suits me," he said. "I've had plenty of close relationships. Look, like I said, mister, no grass here. That one simple truth, I tell lies when it suits me, now resonates in its simplicity." Savile lied when it benefited him, and he got away with it because he made those lies seem absurd. He played the fool, and people bought it. It gave him the freedom to lie without consequence, not just during that interview, but probably for the rest of his life. There are liars, then there are damn liars, and then there are pathological liars. Savile was the latter. We all tell lies now and then, but pathological liars lie constantly, about everything, big and small. They don't care if they're caught in a lie, they take pride in it. Savile was brazen, part of a pattern where his lies were simply tools to manipulate those around him. One question still lingers, almost 10 years after Savile's death. How did someone so famous get away with such abuse and deception for so long? He was a master of hiding in plain sight. He played the part, wore the persona, and made his strange remarks sound like jokes. Sexual relationships, what relationships, he would ask, as if it were all so casual. We thought he was just being eccentric, but the joke was on us, because in hindsight, it was all true, and it wasn't funny at all. He used his fame and charm to manipulate everyone around him, hiding his true nature behind the mask of the quirky, harmless TV personality. And one person who probably knew the most about him was his secretary. Why wouldn't she be allowed to speak to the press? "She knows nothing," Savile quickly claimed, but if you paid attention to his tone, the change in pitch, you could tell he was lying. The tension in his voice was obvious, as was his need to control the narrative. Savile made it clear that he was in charge. His secretary wasn't allowed to speak up, because she knew the secrets he kept. When pressed further about her relationship with him, Savile revealed his true desire for control. "I should hope she's a lot," he said, pushing back against the idea that she wasn't scared of him. It wasn't a joke anymore. He wasn't just talking about a secretary, he was showing how he dominated everyone around him. In one final twist, Savile threw out a veiled threat. "Nobody wants to die young." It was a chilling comment, one that didn't belong in a conversation about his secretary. It was off-topic, disjointed, and yet clearly aimed at someone in the room. The message was unmistakable. Savile died just 2 days before his 85th birthday. Tributes poured in from politicians, TV stars, and even the royal family. He was given what seemed like a state funeral, a gold-plated coffin, thousands lining the streets. But once he was gone, the truth came out, and the allegations of abuse turned into undeniable facts. Operation Newtree was set up to investigate Savile's crimes, and it soon became clear just how many victims had been silenced for so long. Over 600 people came forward, sharing stories of abuse. This was a problem much bigger than anyone realized. It wasn't just Savile. Other high-profile figures like Rolf Harris, Max Clifford, and Gary Glitter were exposed for their crimes as well. Savile was a prime example of how sex offenders don't always fit the stereotypical image we expect. They can be successful, powerful, and beloved figures in society. Savile used his charm, his charity work, and his TV career to conceal his true nature. It was this persona that allowed him to evade justice for so long. In interviews, Savile showed no remorse. When asked if he rethought his actions, he simply said, "No, not really, not really." really. He went to bed each night hoping the world was still a nice place, showing just how disconnected he was from the pain he caused. For those who suffered at his hands, their pain remains, and many still suffer in silence. Savile's mask never fully slipped. Those who knew him well could still see who he truly was beneath it all. It was evil, pure and simple,